course, we are welcoming tonight Senator Mitt Romney from Utah, businessman and politician, and all around just general good guy who wants to march in Black Lives Matter movements with his family across the nation. We thank you so much, Senator, for joining us. And President Johnson, I want to start with you. What is this moment? I want you to give us a state of Black America in this historic moment.
Thank you, Senator, for joining us, and thank you, April, for always heeding the call and those beautiful glasses that you have on. We are in the midst of an opportunity in America where protesters are participating in peaceful protests. But when you look at the protesters, it looked more like America than we've ever seen before. You have black, white, young, old, male, females, all chanting a factual statement saying Black Lives Matter. You have corporate America who's stepping up and making profound statements, and we're now pushing for them to back those statements up with actions. We have the November elections where those protesters in the street in the corporate America can send a clear message that the values that we protest in this democracy, that all men and women are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights, can actually be carried to the ballot box. And policymakers can take that value proposition once elected and implement it in public policy to truly address the decades of structural racism, to give opportunities to young people to protect and keep our elders safe, and to protect the rights of the disadvantaged. It is a juncture of opportunities if we seize upon it. But it can only be executed not through demonstrations alone, not through words. It must be demonstrated through public policy coming out of the November election.
That's an important piece. Senator Romney, I want to ask you the same question, but I'm going to add a little twist to it. And we talked about this earlier. You marched, as well as your family, in the most recent movement with Black Lives Matter. You marched in DC wearing a mask. But as we talk about the state of Black America, not just policing, but a community with the highest numbers of negatives in almost every category, many of your Republican colleagues in Washington are having a hard time saying the words Black Lives Matter. How does that translate into policy, into initiatives, into a better way of life for community, once again, with the highest numbers of negatives in almost every category?
Well, I think the entire country has turned its focus on the fact that there is systemic structural disadvantage associated with being African American, or for that matter, other peoples of color. And we've probably known that over the past decade or longer, obviously much longer than that, but it's been something we've been aware of. But, you know, after the height of the civil rights movement in the 1960s and 70s, many people sort of let that fall from their consciousness, at least from the front burner of their consciousness. And I think with the tragic death of George Floyd and the other events that have occurred in the past several weeks, I think Americans on both sides of the aisle, white America, black America, brown America, and so forth, are saying this continues to be a real problem. And we have not solved this problem, and it's unacceptable that this long in American history, we still haven't made a promise that was made by John Lewis, that was made by Martin Luther King, made by Abraham Lincoln and other great leaders. We've not fulfilled the promise that America offers to everybody. We're all children of the same God. He loves us all. And treat people differently, and to have in place procedures or structures or policies that make it unfair or unequal is simply wrong. And I think America recognizes that's got to change.
So for all of you who are listening to this conversation, we are going to be asking you to give us your questions. We want you to dial in and press *3 on your phone, or tweet or post on social media your question. We want you to ask your question, and we have answers for you tonight. And President Johnson, Senator Romney evoked the name of a tireless giant, small in stature, but a tireless giant who will be eulogized for the last time tomorrow at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, by former President Barack Obama. And all the living presidents, except for President Trump, will be at the funeral. What is the legacy of John Lewis, and how should we take it at this moment when we are hearing things that make our skin turn, that make us grit our teeth, that just make us feel like we're back in the 50s and 60s yet again? What is the legacy of John Lewis that we need to look to in this moment?
John Lewis is a part of a generation that unfortunately viewed in Jet magazine an open casket funeral of Emmett Till, and how that 15-year-old young man was utilized in Mississippi. And his mother had the courage to open up the casket. But John Lewis was a part of the generation who committed, after seeing that scene, to work for social justice, to get in what he called good trouble. And because of his ability to rise above his environment as an ordinary person to do extraordinary things, he sets an example that we all have a gift to give to society, to commit with a level of integrity to do for one's neighbor, for one's country, and for oneself. And through all of the adversities that he was confronted with, sharecropper family, taking on some courageous acts as a freedom rider on buses, being the third head of SNCC, continuing on to understanding the power of the vote, moving from there to get elected in Atlanta as a city council person, fighting hard for the people he represented, being the voice of those who didn't have voices, getting elected to Congress, continuing to be the voice for those who lack voice. An ordinary person who's done extraordinary things. We should not deify him, but we should use his life example to show that we all have the capacity to do good, to get in good trouble.
Yeah, to do good and get into good trouble. Well, right now, I want to bring something up that came up today by the President of the United States on Twitter. Good trouble is to push back peacefully and nonviolently, using the words of the late Congressman John Lewis. But today we saw a tweet from the president essentially saying that he wants to strip federal monies for low income people to live in the suburbs, in the white suburbs, basically. Senator Romney, what say you about that? And this is actually an effort to deconstruct a portion of the civil rights moment and movement in this nation in the 60s, the Fair Housing Act of 1968. You had the Voting Rights Act, and you have the Civil Rights Act. All of those three, that was a trio. And now this president is basically snubbing his nose at one of the pillars of the civil rights movement in the 60s. Talk to me about that. What do you think?
Well, I think it's unfortunate because, like you, I think the Fair Housing Act had a lofty intent. It has not been fulfilled yet, but it has encouraged many communities to find ways to provide additional housing opportunities throughout the country, and to do so without impacting negatively the culture, values, and so forth in respective communities. So yeah, this was an important piece of legislation that was hard fought. And I can tell you that my dad was Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in the late 1960s, 1968, when President Nixon became president. My dad served as his Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. And one of the things he fought for was open communities, was to take the Fair Housing Act and implement it fully. Now, when President Nixon found out about that, he tried to shut it down. But my dad kept on battling, recognizing the only way you're going to see a reduction in racism and discrimination in our country is if people of different ethnic backgrounds and races get to know each other and go to the same schools and go to the same churches and have the same opportunities. And when that happens, why you'll reduce the fear and the anxiety. And that was part of what the Fair Housing Act was designed to do. So I'm dismayed by the president's tweet. We'll see what actually happens. This is political season, so some things that are said are not actually done. I hope that's one of those. And let me just mention something else that, as you were talking about John Lewis and his legacy, I just want to underscore something. One of the things that I've learned in my life that I had not appreciated as a young person, even as a young businessman, is the impact an individual has on others. I've watched individuals who were unusual people and watched other people influenced by them. I watched a guy named Bill Marriott Jr., for instance, who's been the chief executive officer of Marriott Corporation. He cares very deeply about people. And in his company, there are 170,000 people who wear the Marriott badge every day. And interestingly, his values, the care he has for people, is something which is, in some respects, emulated by others in his organization. It's true in the case of John Lewis. This is a man who not only did things that are notable and should be recognized, but he, by his personal character and his vision, his fundamental goodness, and is willing to make good trouble, make us uncomfortable, he changed many of us who watched him. And that's a legacy which goes on. And I say this not just to extol John Lewis, but to suggest to all of us who are listening tonight that we also influence others. And it's critical, if we want to change America, that we make sure that our hearts are changed and we communicate our love and care for others, regardless of our differences and separations.
Thank you for that. Once again, Congressman John Lewis is laid to rest tomorrow. He's in Atlanta. He will be eulogized at Ebenezer Baptist Church. And this man put his life on the line for equality for all. And you don't find that today. You don't find that today. And you have to stop and take a pause to recognize those before us so we could sit here and have this conversation with Senator Mitt Romney. Because if it weren't for those ancestors who were once elders, we would not be here at this moment. And I thank you so much, late Congressman John Lewis, and all of you who paved the way for all of us. So moving on, once again, we're having an interactive session. You want to ask a question, your voice will be heard. Press *3. So let's move on. President Johnson, I want to ask you, this pandemic has exposed so many ills. The fractures or the hairline fractures are now breaks that are protruding through the foundation. How do we fix this in the midst of this pandemic? We have unemployment, underemployment. There are people who, the rolls are beyond, 11 million now that are counted. You have people who don't have health insurance who are hurting. You have people who cannot pay their rent. What is the solution, sir?
Unfortunately, elections have consequences, and what we're looking at is the consequence of the 2016 presidential elections. There is no reason why in this country we were not prepared for a health pandemic. There is no reason why in this country the delivery of health care and access to health care has become so politicized that we are demeaning our ability to truly function as a nation because we have so many people who are sick and cannot afford treatment outside of emergency care, which only runs up the cost of the care. There is no reason why we have the level of homelessness, much of which is a result of mental health issues that you look at municipal, state, and federal mental health budgets, it's been depleted because so many people have used moments to politicize issues that should be quality of life issues for all Americans. And then when you roll into that the tool of race, for far too long we've used the tool of race to divide and to score political points in ways in which we undermine our ability to be a more prosperous nation. We have to move beyond the politicization of key safety nets and beyond the basic things that require any nation to be a healthy nation, which only should be measured by how well we care for our elderly, whether or not we're preparing our young people for a prosperous future, And do we protect the rights of the disadvantaged? Those are the indicators of a healthy society. But when we politicize the delivery of those basic safety nets, we begin to question the integrity of our democracy. We undermine our economic systems, and we leave depleted so much of what could be great potential that come from individuals and communities that's unrealized.
Thank you, President Johnson. Senator Romney, voting is one tool to make change, but also accountability. I always say power means service. And sitting in this unique perch that I've had for 23 years at the White House, I see politics is humanity. Why is it that we are now seeing a fight between Democrats and Republicans over how much those who are suffering are going to get 600 versus 200? Why is it that we are seeing that there's a fight over if there's going to be money given to tenants so that they can pay their rent, or if landlords will be able to pay the mortgages? Why is there such a fight when it's about humanity, the human condition and people, not about party versus party?
I begin by noting the good news, and that is when the crisis first hit, even though we were ill prepared, we did not shower ourselves with glory in the way we got our testing out. It took us too long to get testing. We didn't have the stockpile we needed of personal protective equipment. We didn't have the machines like we should have. So there were many things that we got wrong. But initially, Congress came together, Republicans and Democrats, and passed on a unanimous basis nearly $3 trillion in aid for American families, for our businesses, for a healthcare system, and so forth. I'd never seen anything quite like that. During the Great Recession that occurred some in 2008, 2009, 2007, there was a program of some $700 billion to try and rescue the financial system. This was almost $3 trillion and done in a matter of days. So why is it taking so much longer now? Well, now we've got a window on what's really happening, and there's a real debate among various members, even within our own caucuses, meeting Republicans with Republicans, Democrats with Democrats, and across the aisle saying, what's the right thing to do from here? And we're getting different information from different sources, and we want to get it right this time, because last time around with the $3 trillion, we made some mistakes. A lot of people took advantage of the PPP program, for instance, that was designed for businesses in trouble, and they took money even though the business was not in trouble. And so this time people want to get it right, and we have differences of opinion. I don't think it's a matter of not respecting one another or not wanting to help the American people. I think it's more some genuinely, seriously different views on what's the right thing to do at this stage. But one thing I will note, and I will introduce this tomorrow, which is that the unemployment insurance supplement, which people have been receiving and been counting on, should not disappear while we're in the middle of this debate between Republicans and Democrats. And so I'm going to propose a solution, a unemployment insurance continuation through the end of the year with a supplemental payment, and I'm going to be proposing that. We'll see if that gets accepted or not by people on my side of the aisle and across the aisle. But I'd like to make sure that the unemployment supplemental program continues, so that people can pay their rent, put food on the table, and have confidence at least through the end of this year.
So with my news hat on, you just made news. So, but the question is, will you get the buy-in from your party? You are out there kind of on an island by yourself since you went against this president on impeachment. So do you think you can get the votes, especially as Mitch McConnell is not for that at all? He's for the $200, not the $600.
Well, my plan would say, look, a state can either go to a program where people receive 80% of what they were making while they were employed, or for the next month, they can get $500 supplement on top of the regular state unemployment insurance. The month after that, it goes down to $400 supplement. The month after that, it goes down to a $300 supplement on top of the regular state unemployment program. So that's my proposal. I don't know where my colleagues will stand. My guess is they're going to say, look, that's a pretty good compromise, Mitt, and I'll get some support. The bigger question for me is where will the Democrats stand on that? But we'll probably find out relatively soon. And by the way, there'll be other measures that come from other senators. Senator Johnson is looking at a plan of his own, and I think there's a real belief, certainly on my side of the aisle, that we can't hold off the unemployment supplemental benefit while we're negotiating a very, very broad next phase of a relief package.
Thanks. And once again, we're talking about COVID-19, the CARES and Heroes Act. President Johnson, what do you think about this, about these proposals in a time of great need for these supplementals? And what Senator Romney just said he was going to propose tomorrow. He just broke news.
I think it's a step in the right direction. I think it's important for we return to a functioning Senate where we have civility. We return to a functioning Congress where a House and Senate can put American people first, that we actually move away from things that shouldn't be partisan and look at our economy, look at the health and welfare of our citizens and seek solutions where everyone can benefit from the opportunity of input, but coming out of that input is the interests of the American people first. That's really important. Far too long we have been stuck in Washington gridlock around issues that shouldn't be partisan. We are in the midst of a health crisis pandemic, a national health crisis that's lacking a federal response. And until we get a true federal response where all 50 states are doing the exact same thing so we can lower the contraction of the virus like we've seen in other countries, we're going to continue to be on this treadmill. And people shouldn't suffer because of the lack of leadership. Leaders should step up who have the ability and authority to truly solve big problems with creative solutions. And I hope that this is one of those creative solutions that can help bring people together.
So it's so interesting that we're talking about the tools to help people. And one of the tools in the toolkit happens to be voting at a time when we are concerned about our lives, either voting by mail or voting in person. You have to don a mask and be safe, physically distance yourself. I don't say social distance. I think that is a misnomer. You need to physically distance yourself, but be socially connected. So we have, with that voting issue, we have a question on the line, someone who pressed *3 on voting, and then another one on Bill Barr. So yes, caller, ask your question, please.
So we have Dolores Sellers in Burlington, North Carolina. Dolores, go ahead with your question.
As far as voting, we are all aware that this president is going to try his best to block our vote, try to keep us from voting, and maybe the COVID situation, the inactivity of this president is going to cause another mess in November. Do we have a system in place yet that is going to be most effective in assuring that we are all able to vote?
So I'll
Who are
take
you
that question.
directing that question
The short answer, there isn't a federal system in place. After hearing the testimony of AG Barr, I am even more concerned with ensuring the integrity of this election is carried out properly. Once again, we're politicizing things that should be a part of not only our constitutional right, but it's the most patriotic thing we can do for our democracy, and that's open up access for people to participate. What I heard yesterday, unfortunately, was around mail-in balloting, something that many people use. We should do all we can to ensure the integrity of the voting process while we open up access to voting. The administration of election is a state-by-state reality. Each state have a different set of laws. Because we are in a pandemic crisis, I am desperately concerned of what that will look like on election day in November and in some states, early voting leading up to it. The horrific scenes we've seen out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin should never be repeated, where people had to choose between their personal health and their right to vote. That shouldn't be a choice. We should be able to exercise the right to vote and be secure around the parameters so we can protect our health. But at the rate we're going, unless there is an agreement coming out of this Congress, it's going to be a state by state reality, and it's going to look very different depending on what state you live in.
Senator
I
Romney?
think, yeah, I think that you make a very good point, which is it's going to be a state by state process, and your opportunity for voting and the ease of voting may be a function of where you live, which state you live in, as well as what community you live in. And I lived in Massachusetts a good part of my life, and served as governor, and I believe we had a pretty good system. I'm sure there were some complaints, but people felt they had the opportunity to vote. I now live in Utah and have for about a decade. And in Utah, we have vote by mail. And the great majority of our people, I'll bet it's close to 90%, vote by mail. And let me tell you, it's very convenient. We haven't had problems with voter fraud. And I think states would be wise to put in place a program like this. I don't want to see a federal takeover of the voting system. That's not how the Constitution has described it. And states are responsible for giving people the opportunity to vote. But at the same time, one thing that really concerns me is when I see videos on my TV that show that in certain places there are lines a mile long, and those tend to be places where minority communities are voting. And then in other places, there's no line at all. Something tells me that's not right, and I know that's not right. And if state officials are putting up with that kind of discrimination and that kind of voter repression and suppression, there's got to be oversight of that. And I know John Lewis proposed a Voting Rights Act to make sure that the courts would oversee those kinds of circumstances. I think we need to have oversight where there's clear evidence of an effort to deny certain people the right to easy, open access to vote. Look, we're a democracy. The right to vote is fundamental to a democracy. We can't have people trying to mess that up. And if they are, the courts really need to step in and say, stop. People have a right to vote.
Yes, and pre-clearance once again has been gutted from the Voting Rights Act, and we are now voting without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act. And there is an effort right now on the Hill to rename this new effort the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act. So thank you, Senator Romney. Now we're going to go to the William Barr question from social media. Good evening.
We have a question from Pastor Deborah in Dearborn, Michigan. Pastor Deborah, go ahead with your question.
Hi, this is Senator Romney, April Ryan, and Mr. Johnson. Blessings to you all. I want to say very quickly, Senator Romney, when your father was governor of Michigan, we loved him. He was very bipartisan, and we loved him. But my question quickly to you is, what is the Senate going to do about this toxic relationship between Donald Trump and William Barr? It is very dangerous domestically and internationally, and we are really asking for the American Bar Association to disbar William Barr. Something needs to be done. Thank you.
And if I would add, there is a concern that the rule of law has been broken by the president as well as the U.S. Attorney General. Speak, Senator, please.
Well, there's some things I'm not going to touch. There's no reason to make news like that. But I can't say that I've been a little surprised that the Attorney General has been as if you will, strident in supporting the president's point of view. I guess he sees that as part of his job. There's some things I agree with. There's some I don't. I thought his characterization of the Mueller investigation was unfortunate and not. I thought the kind of balanced presentation that should have been made. But so I have some differences. But of course, I'm going to have differences with anybody, whether I agree with them or not. There'll be places where I disagree. I can tell you this. That I believe at a time like this, we need people who respect the First Amendment and the right to people to have free speech, who respect the media, look, we
Yes,
can
I
disagree.
say yes to
Yes.
that.
Yeah, we can disagree with the media, but it's free press. People have the right to express their point of view, and people who own a newspaper or a TV station have the right to express their point of view, as well as reporters and so forth. Our judicial system is meant to be independent of politics. And anytime it begins to look like it's becoming a tool of politics, I think it's very unfortunate. I think the decision, for instance, to ask Roger Stone, or to let Roger Stone uh, be free of jail sentence, looks like a political decision. And I think that's the wrong kind of signal to send. These institutions, the media, our judicial system, our Constitution and the Bill of Rights, these are fundamental to the existence of our republic. And attacking them for political points is, I think, an extremely unfortunate and, in some respects, dangerous to the health of our republic.
And as we're talking about the issue of um, the Attorney General, I want to ask you, Senator Romney, and also President Johnson, do you believe that the president and his nominations in the courts, particularly in the Supreme Court, have been politicized? And are you concerned about if he could get another 4 years, what the courts will look like, especially the U.S. Supreme Court?
So
Well,
I'll jump
I
in
believe.
quickly. Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Senator. I'm sorry.
Oh,
You
I was just going to
personally,
say,
I don't think our democracy can survive another 4 years of this administration. Period. It goes beyond just appointments to the court. It goes beyond to appointments. The way we have watched what we have witnessed. I mean, just basic norms and decorum and civility have all gone out the door. There are a lot of questions of whether or not laws have been broken. There are questions of whether or not we have been compromised. The fact that we have soldiers who are defending this nation on foreign soil, and there are credible sources saying that a foreign nation is taking out bounties against them. And we're talking about soldiers who come from all of our communities and some of our loved ones. We will not survive another 4 years under this current regime. That's my statement, Senator. You don't have to buy into that one, but we cannot, as a nation, move forward the way we have seen the last 3 years play out.
Senator?
well, you won't be surprised that, given the fact that I voted that the president should be removed from office because of an abuse of office, abuse of power, I won't be voting for President Trump for re-election. I do believe the nation would survive because of the heart of the American people and the greatness of our institutions. We've had difficult situations in the past. I think we can make them through them. I can say this, which is, I believe if the president is reelected, that he will appoint justices which, if you will, follow his point of view with regards to the law and the Constitution. And so they will be strict constructionists and will be in the mold of his prior appointments. I don't believe that there'll be an effort to politicize the court so much as to make it more conform with the judicial philosophy which he and members of my party share. I applaud conservative members of the court who believe that we should follow the Constitution as it's written, as opposed to try and come up with new constitutional rights that are not in that text itself. So we'll agree to disagree in some respects, President Johnson, but with regards to the need for leadership which brings us together, we're on the same page.
All right. And whatever happens in the courts, that's like, particularly the Supreme Court, it's like 30 to 40 years. If the court goes one way, just leans totally one way, it's pretty much it. That's my journalistic opinion. So that's me. So neither one of them are subscribing to my opinion. I said it. Now, next question. This one from social media. Good evening. How is the government handling businesses that applied and received PPP aid who should have never qualified? And remember, many Black companies, small businesses that were Black and brown and women owned did not get that first round. The second round was hard, but they're getting it more now. But if you didn't have a relationship with the banks, you weren't getting it. In the first round, they were left out. So Senator, talk to us about that.
Well, there's still $140 billion left in the PPP program. And so if there's a business, large or small, well, I say large, 500 employees and less is required. But if you're 500 employees or less and you haven't received those funds and your business was severely impacted by the COVID crisis, why you're eligible to get those funds. And as long as you use the funds for appropriate purposes, paying your rent, paying your utilities, and paying for your employees, why those loans will be forgiven. So whether you're a sole proprietor or a business of 5 or 6 people or less or more, you can get that. You can apply for those funds and receive those funds. Today, I take that back. Yesterday, we Republicans put out a proposal to have another PPP program. This would be for businesses 300 employees and less, with a special emphasis on minority-owned and women-owned businesses. And in this case, if a business had suffered as much as a 50% reduction in its revenues during this year as a result of COVID, it would be eligible to receive this loan, and the loan would be forgivable. So I presume this is going to be in the final the final relief package, and so this will be another opportunity for small businesses, particularly those owned by women and minorities, to avail themselves of these funds. We want these businesses not to close down.
That's right.
And not to lay people off, but to retain their employees and to stay open so that when COVID is finally behind us, we're able to start back up again.
It sounds wonderful, but it's just the hope is that some of these businesses have lasted this long to even be able to apply for these loans, and that's the reality in this moment. Here's another question from social media. People are engaging, and if you're on the phone, press star 3. Once again, star 3 if you are on the phone and want to ask a question. Here's from social media. Here's a question. We are advocating vote by mail. I am concerned with the new Postmaster General appointed by President Trump. Can this new appointment have an impact on the mail-in vote? I would like to ask President Johnson and then Senator.
You know, I want to go back to the PPP loan real quick. If you go to our website, naacp.org, you can click on the link and you can apply for the PPP loan on our website. We want to make sure that we get as many people qualified for the opportunity as possible. African Americans across the country, we were the fastest growing small business sector. In the small business sector, we have more business in that sector growing than any other community. We are establishing businesses. Some of them are small, most of them are 10 employees or less, and we would hate to see this health pandemic destroy that opportunity. So go to naacp.org and click on there, and you can apply. We would direct you to a financial institution through our partnership with Diversity Capital to ensure you are partnered and you are qualified. Vote by mail. It is extremely important, I think I touched on this before, that we open up access to democracy. It should not be based on one zip code determine the level of your ability to participate in this democracy. We want to truly honor the legacy of John Lewis. Local jurisdictions, states, and Congress will pass legislation inclusive of vote by mail provisions so that more people can participate and not have to balance between their health or their lives or their constitutional right. It is something in ACP we have fought for since our inception in 1909. We will continue to fight for. It is our job, our role as an organization to make democracy work. And the first step in making democracy work is access to the ballot box. And that's something that should be afforded to all citizens.
All right. Senator Romney?
Well, I've seen vote by mail work in my state. I'm sure it took some time to get the system to work. but ballots are mailed out to homes based upon registered voters and, of course, registered addresses. One votes by checking off the various boxes, and then you sign a document with your signature. That signature will be compared with the signature on file at the city clerk or county clerk office, and the system has worked. Now, it's worked for some time in our state, and it took a while for them, I'm sure, to get it exactly right. And I'm sure there's some improvements that can still be made. But the mail system is what we rely upon, and it's worked quite well. I know it may be difficult for some other states that don't yet have the experience with vote by mail to be able to put in place a highly reliable system by November. The COVID crisis has made that a priority for many states. I, for one, believe that vote by mail is a more secure system because if we think there's been voter fraud or machines have been tampered with, we can always go back to the paper copy. We can compare signatures. We can talk to the person to see if they actually voted. We can find out whether they're dead or alive. I mean, all these things are available if we have a ballot with a name on it. So I'm hopeful that we'll see improvements and more voting by mail by November. But this is very unlikely to be something mandated by Washington. It takes Washington a long time to pass a law. You've seen that, a long, laborious process. And that's the way our Constitution designed things. We were designed to go very slowly and to make changes in a very measured way. And so it's very unlikely that before this November's election, you're going to see the federal government mandate how states carry out elections. So the action is going to be at the state level. And I'll tell you, if I were worried about voting in my state, I'd be going to the Secretary of State's office or whoever it is that oversees elections, and I'd be getting some answers. And if I didn't get the answers that I thought were right, I'd be letting people know.
Yeah, that's it. I think the community is very upset right now, worried because we have had a history of voter suppression. That's one of the reasons why the Voting Rights Act was put into place in the 60s, why Dr. King and John Lewis and so many others, C.T. Vivian, Harry Belafonte, Julian Bond, so many worked to make sure our right to vote was in place. So, and I get the concern. Senator Romney, we have a surprise for you. Someone is calling from your home state with a question. Utah.
Good.
So we
Go
have
ahead,
Kathy
caller.
Bartholomew. We have Kathy Bartholomew from Salt Lake City.
Hi, Senator Romney. My question is, we've talked a lot about John Lewis making good trouble, and I'm just curious, what kind of good trouble are you making in Washington?
Well, my guess is if you made a call to the White House, they'd give you a long list, Kathy. And as you know, there are a lot of people that are not happy with me in our state because I don't just sort of march with whatever comes from the White House. I said when I was running for office that I would be with the president if I thought he was right on policy for our state and for our nation. But if I thought he was doing something which was destructive or damaging or wrong, that I would speak my mind. And I've attempted to do that, and hopefully will continue to have the courage to do that. I guess I've learned throughout my life that if you compromise with your conscience, you don't sleep well. You feel a lot of stress, and it haunts you for years to come. And I'm at a stage in my life where I'm just not going to do that anymore. So if the things I believe, I'm going to say them, I'm going to do them. And I believe that people in Washington understand that. I'm kind of a pain in the rear for a lot of people. I understand that. I'm pleased to say that even though I was the only Republican to vote for the removal of the president through the impeachment process, the members of my caucus, that means the Republican senators, were welcoming to me. They were not happy, but one of them said this. He said, I wouldn't want to be part of a group that wanted to punish someone because they had voted their conscience. And my colleagues voted their consciences. I did the same thing, and I appreciate a place where that kind of respect is afforded.
Wow. Well, thank you, caller from Utah. You made him feel good. So I want to go to a couple of other questions, and I want to talk about the inclusive nature of politics right now, or the lack of inclusion. And Senator Romney, I want to go to you first. My good friend Shermichael Singleton was a Republican commentator who recently wrote a piece for the Washington Post sharing why he's decided to leave the GOP and become an independent. Do you think the GOP has done well with diversity and inclusion?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that our party did not follow the course that was laid out after my loss. I lost in 2012 to President Obama, and my party sat down and said, gosh, we haven't won the popular vote in quite a while, and we need to make some changes. And the changes we ought to make included doing better with minority voters. And that really hasn't happened. We got 6% of the African American vote during my presidential campaign. President Trump upped that to 8%, but both numbers are embarrassingly small. We just haven't done the job we should have done, and I believe could have done, to attract more African Americans and other minorities to our cause. And by the way, I believe that our principles, the conservative principles, are better for the people of our country, black, brown, white, and so forth. I believe they're better for getting the economy going and better for social justice. I honestly believe those things. I know some people disagree with me, but I do believe that we also need to have individuals, leaders, who make sure they don't do anything that draws upon division or resentment or victimhood or hate, but instead calls for the American people to be united and to recognize we have more in common with one another than we have that's different. And I'm afraid that it's been pointed out that the president has said things which have been divisive and which have communicated to people that may be racist, that well, he's sort of done things that appeal to them, to racist individuals. And that, I think, is very unfortunate. Is one of the reasons why it's hard for us to attract the kind of minority support I think our policies would otherwise provide.
President Johnson, especially on issues of immigration, especially on issues of Black Lives Matter, especially on issues of, what is it, S-hole nations. I mean, Charlottesville, let's go down the list. We can, that.
We are witnessing something we probably haven't seen since the 1950s or 40s, where not only is race being used as a tool, we are devolving into a level of tribalism that is just completely unhealthy. Whether you're talking about, Latin American immigrants who come to this country, individuals who come from the Caribbean or the African continent, how individuals who are native to these countries are identified. I mean, it's a level of tribalism, which I go back to, if we don't change the level of civility and public discourse in this nation, it's going to continue to be unsafe for far too many people. And now it's going to be being used as a sharper tool to try to gin up a level of energy for a re-election that we cannot stand idly by. There are some things that need to go above partisanship. When you look at even the concept of vote by mail, how they are trying to discredit the system is something that we should not accept. The fact that they are undermining the ability of the post office to properly carry out its duties by reducing service should not be the reality. We live in a democracy where the American people have an opportunity to vote. We have an electoral college system. We shouldn't tolerate individuals undermining the will of the people to talk about how we should govern. Political discourse typically fall in three areas: who gets taxed, who's not taxed, and what the tax dollars are spent on. That's political discourse. And we can disagree and we can come back and continue that conversation. But when you begin to create tribalism and otherness, that really threatens the integrity of who we are as a nation, and it undermines our ability to move into the future.
And we have a few minutes left, and I'm going to get to a couple more questions. Senator Romney, you brought up your race against then President Barack Obama. Timing is everything. So many people say we need a Republican voice like Mitt Romney now. Do you think if you would have waited later in life to run for president of the United States instead of against Barack Obama, things would have been different?
Well, he was a particularly effective candidate and politician and a good man. And I respect him as an individual. I've come to know him better since the campaign, along with people who worked with him. David Axelrod, for instance, I've come to know and respect him. So probably had I known them a little better, I might have been inclined not to run at that time. But I believe my policies would be better for America, and that's why I ran. And I recognize it's an uphill climb to run against a skilled political figure like Barack Obama and to run against an incumbent. Would I have been better if timing would have allowed me to run for an open seat, if you will? Why, yeah, I think most political scientists would say you got a better shot if it's not an incumbent that you're running against. I looked in 2016 and gave it some consideration as to whether I should run. But I decided that it was time for a new face. I thought that I had lost fair and square twice, frankly, and the idea of going back and doing it again would not be the most effective way for my party to make an advanced effort. And so I thought that we needed someone who was a new face, whether that would be a Marco Rubio or John Kasich or Chris Christie or Jeb Bush. There were a number of people who I thought would do a better job. I did not think Donald Trump was likely to become our nominee. And as you know, I did not support him as our nominee. And I did not support him in part because I believe that he appealed to the racist tendencies on the part of some people in our country. That's continued. I had hoped that would end when he said he'd become presidential. That has unfortunately not ended. And of course, he says he's not racist. I don't know what his heart is. A number of people have said I don't know what's in his heart, but I do see what he says. And unfortunately, some of the things he said appeal to people who have racist tendencies. So would the world have been better if I were president? Well, you're asking the wrong guy. I ran, for Pete's sakes. And at this stage, I'm doing my very best to help our country and to do the things that I think are right. Not everyone will agree with me, but I can tell you at this stage in my life, I'm doing what I believe is right, and to the extent humanly possible, without exception.
The late Maya Angelou said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. He was showing us on that campaign trail, trust and believe. President Johnson, stop laughing. So anyway, but since we're talking about the presidential election process, the presumptive nominee on the Democratic side is former Vice President Joe Biden. And this is a question for both of you, but I want to go to Senator Mitt Romney first on this. You've heard the lineup of women that Joe Biden is considering for VP. If he called and asked you to decide for him, Senator Romney, which of his choices would be your top picks? And then President Johnson, the same question for you.
Well,
this is a transformational moment now. We got to think about someone who's transformational, not just on Corona, but also on issues of race.
As Joe Biden, I can tell you that I've gotten to know Kamala Harris on the Senate floor, and I find her to be a very charming person. I've watched Susan Rice from afar. I don't know her very well, but a very impressive individual. I got to watch Val Deming, who was one of the prosecutors in the impeachment trial. She's a very capable, impressive prosecutor, and impressed with all of them. I think Amy Klobuchar is terrific, but she's pulled herself out of the contention. So those are some of the names that come to mind. But I'm not going to weigh in. I trust Joe Biden to make a decision that he's comfortable with, and that, of course, is the most important single consideration.
President Johnson?
The beautiful thing about the options that we've been presented with, they're all more qualified than the guy that's in the White House now. So I just look forward to the decision.
Wow. All right. Well, short and sweet. Well, I want to thank you all for once again having me. It's such an honor to be a part of these discussions from the nation's oldest civil rights organization, I mean, as a kid, my mother used to always tell me, you got to be a part of the NAACP. Therefore, I was one of those NAACP babies in those baby pageants. And it's just such an honor to work with an esteemed group that's trying to advance the cause of a community that still has the highest numbers of negatives in almost every category. Senator Romney, thank you so much for your time. I will be calling you for interviews. Don't act like you don't know who I am, please. I will be reaching out to your people. Tell them, President Johnson, I will call you. I will text you anytime, day or night. So, but I thank you so much for your time and for breaking news with us. And President Johnson, thank you once again for your leadership. And thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of these great, informative, and interactive panel discussions. And now I turn it over to you, sir.
I would say thank you to you, April.
Yeah, go ahead.
You're a great leader, and people model themselves after you. President Johnson, you and your organization make a real difference for our country. I spoke with the director of the NAACP for Utah, Idaho, and Nevada today, and she spoke glowingly of you. Look, I just want to say thank you for all that you do. It's been an honor to be with you, and hopefully we'll help bring America together at such a critical time.
So thank you, Senator. Thank you, April, and thank everyone who tuned in for another NAACP Teletown Hall meeting. I'm a native of Detroit, Michigan, and Governor Romney's father was the governor. Governor Romney's father was the governor of Michigan, Senator Romney, I should say. And many African Americans appreciated his willingness to reach across communities, not only political parties, but communities. And it's been refreshing to see Senator Romney begin to do the same thing. We must, as a nation, as a community, reestablish civility in Washington, D.C. That's the only way we can get things done. Political parties are only vehicles for agendas. Political parties are only vehicles for agendas. And for African Americans, our agenda is not based on political parties' determination. It's based on what's in the best interest for our communities. And so as we continue to have these discussions, we must keep that in mind. In NAACP, we're nonpartisan organizations. We don't support political parties or candidates, but we do support agendas that have our best interests at heart. So thank all of you for joining us. Please go online to sign up to be a volunteer this year. We need your support to turn out to vote. Our democracy is at stake. It is our job to make what others believe impossible possible. Let's turn up the heat. Let's turn out and vote. And let's do well by the communities we serve. Thank you. Have a wonderful night.
The phone cast has ended. Thank you for participating.